Let's make it interesting. 2 miles. Let's see one of you hotshots hit the 2-mile mark. What's that, Sergeant? 3,200 meters? Even better. A real challenge, Commander Maddox's voice, amplified by a portable loudspeaker, scraped across the shimmering heat of the Afghan proving ground. He was a man who loved the sound of his own authority, a man whose confidence was built on the shine of his boots and the crispness of his uniform's press. He scanned the crowd of assembled soldiers, a mix of seasoned operators and base support staff, all gathered for a demonstration of the new M210 enhanced sniper rifle. His gaze, hidden behind reflective sunglasses, was a physical force, searching for a target for his particular brand of motivational condescension. It landed on a figure at the edge of the assembly, someone who clearly didn't belong. Or hey, he boomed, a cruel smirk spreading across his face. Maybe the nurse wants to go? Captain Rostova, isn't it? Think you can handle something with a little more kick than a saline drip? The crowd, conditioned to the commander's casual brutalities, erupted in a wave of nervous, sycophantic laughter. A few exchanged uncomfortable glances, but no one dared challenge the base's second-in-command. The insult hung in the dry, dusty air, sharp and foul. But the target of his mockery, Captain Eva Rostova, did not react. She stood in her standard-issue fatigues, the Red Cross on her sleeve the only marker of her role, a stark contrast to the tactical gear of the snipers at the front. Her posture was relaxed, but not lazy, a study in quiet neutrality. She offered no verbal reply, no flinch, no tightening of the jaw. Her gaze simply shifted from the commander to the distant, almost invisible steel plate shimmering in the mirage 2 miles away. She remained a perfect island of calm in a sea of derision. From a shaded position near the command tent, a visiting dignitary watched the exchange. General Thorne, a man whose face was a roadmap of forgotten conflicts, saw the whole thing. He saw the commander's preening arrogance, he heard the crowd's cowardly laughter, and he saw the nurse's profound, unnerving silence. But when he saw her stance, the subtle, almost imperceptible way she distributed her weight, a flicker of something ancient and dangerous sparked in his memory. He didn't watch the buffoon with the loudspeaker anymore. He watched the woman who was being publicly humiliated, and a deep, cold certainty began to settle in his gut. If you believe that true respect is earned in silence and proven through action, type competence below. Commander Maddox, basking in the glow of what he perceived as a successful display of dominance, decided to press his advantage. He was performing not just for the soldiers, but for General Thorne, and he wanted to appear both knowledgeable and firmly in command. You see, a shot like that isn't just about pointing and shooting, he continued, his voice dripping with pedagogical arrogance as he gestured vaguely toward the distant target. At 3,200 meters, you're not just fighting distance. You're fighting the planet. You have to account for the Coriolis effect, the literal spin of the Earth pulling your round off course. You have to calculate for spin drift, barometric pressure, humidity, temperature. You have to read a mirage that's boiling like a pot of water. It's a science, an art. It takes thousands of hours of dedicated training. It's not something you can just pick up. Every word was a hammer blow, intended to build a wall of impossibility around the task, further framing his joke at Captain Rostova's expense. The target itself was a monument to this impossibility. It was a standard IPSC silhouette, but at that range, the powerful optics mounted on the demonstration rifles could barely resolve its shape against the brown, dusty hillside. It was a ghost, a rumor of a target, its presence confirmed only by a small, heat-sensitive camera feed displayed on a ruggedized monitor near the firing line. The weapon for this impossible task, the M210, sat on its bipod like an altar to modern warfare. It was a beautiful and terrible instrument, a fusion of carbon fiber, aerospace-grade aluminum, and precision ground glass. Its ballistic computer could account for a dozen variables, but it was still just a tool. It required a master craftsman to make it sing. The snipers who had been demonstrating it, men with years of experience, had been landing shots consistently at 1,500 meters, An impressive feat, the 3,200-meter target was set up as a theoretical maximum, a marketing claim, not a practical expectation. As Maddox spoke, the crowd's energy shifted from mockery to a kind of pity. They looked at Captain Rostova, standing alone, and saw a woman trapped in an unwinnable social conflict. Her silence, which had at first seemed mysterious, now looked to many like resignation or fear. They felt the second-hand shame of her situation, the sheer, crushing weight of the commander's public disdain. But they had misread her silence entirely. It was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of calculation. As Maddox listed the environmental factors, Eva's eyes were doing the work. She wasn't listening to his lecture. She was reading the world. She saw the slight tremor in a distant acacia tree, noting a crosswind the small flags at the firing line missed. She watched the pattern of the heat mirage, not as a distortion, but as a map of air density and velocity. She felt the gentle pressure of the air on her face and registered its temperature. Her mind, a biological supercomputer honed by a discipline they couldn't possibly comprehend, was already painting a firing solution. General Thorne, still watching, saw it too. He recognized that focused, data-gathering gaze. He'd seen it before, in the mountains of the Hindu Kush, through the grainy feed of a Reaper drone, just before a high-value target who thought himself safe ceased to exist. It was the look of a predator. The stance he'd noticed earlier. Feet shoulder-width apart, weight slightly forward on the balls of her feet, hands clasped loosely behind her back, was not the posture of a medic at ease. It was the resting stance of a long-gun specialist, a position designed for stability and immediate, fluid movement into a prone firing position. The general's face remained a mask of stone, but inside, a forgotten file was opening in his mind, a file stamped with a single, evocative word: Nightingale. The suffocating moment stretched on, with Maddox's smirk firmly in place, waiting for Rostova's inevitable, humiliating refusal. But the chain of events was taken out of his hands. A young lieutenant, eager to please the commander and misinterpreting the situation as a genuine, if bizarre, order, stepped forward. "Ma'am," the lieutenant said, his voice earnest, "the firing point is ready for you." He gestured toward the M210 rifle, turning Maddox's cruel joke into a concrete, unavoidable challenge. A hush fell over the crowd. This was no longer a rhetorical beatdown. It was a formal event. Every eye fixed on Captain Rostova, the sole actor on a stage she had not chosen. The air was thick with anticipation, the collective expectation that she would now stammer an excuse, beg off, and cement her role as the day's fool. Maddox's smirk widened. This was even better than he had planned. He would be seen as the tough but fair commander, giving even a nurse a chance to try, and her failure would be her own. But the quiet captain did not fail him. She simply turned her head slightly, her calm gaze meeting the young lieutenant's. A single word fell from her lips, spoken no louder than a normal conversation, yet it landed with the force of a gavel. Understood, that one word, devoid of emotion, of anger, of fear, or of ego, changed the atmospheric pressure on the range. It was the sound of a door being locked, of a process being initiated. It was a word of pure, professional acceptance. Without another glance at the stunned commander, she began to walk toward the firing line. Her every movement was a lesson in quiet efficiency. There was no hesitation, no wasted energy. Her stride was measured, her arms swinging in a relaxed, rhythmic cadence. It was the walk of a person moving through a space they owned completely. The nervous laughter died in the throats of the onlookers. The smirks faded. A new tension, sharp and electric, replaced the smug certainty of moments before. This was not the walk of a victim. As she approached the prone firing position, the range master, a grizzled sergeant major with a face like a worn leather boot, watched her closely. He was a man who had forgotten more about shooting than Maddox would ever know, and he saw something in the captain's eyes, a depthless, professional calm that he had only ever seen in the true masters of his craft. As she knelt, he wordlessly reached out and adjusted the rifle's bipod, ensuring its feet were perfectly seated in the dirt. It was a small, almost imperceptible gesture, but it was the first sign of respect she had been shown all day. A silent acknowledgement from one professional to another. Eva didn't just lie down behind the rifle. She fused with it. She built her position, her nest, with the methodical grace of a watchmaker. Her hands, which the commander had implicitly mocked as being fit only for medical instruments, moved with an unnerving, fluid precision. She checked the rifle's seating, adjusted the cheek weld, and tested the rear bag for stability. Her fingers then moved to the M210's advanced ballistic computer and optics. But she wasn't fumbling with it like a novice. She was interrogating it. Her fingers danced across the control pads, her eyes scanning the digital display, cross-referencing its data with the analog information she had already gathered from the environment. She was not a guest using the equipment. She was its master, confirming that her instrument was properly tuned before the performance began. The silence on the range was now absolute. It was no longer the silence of mockery or pity, but the profound, breathless silence of pure suspense. The soldiers, the snipers, the officers, all stood frozen, their attention locked on the solitary figure behind the M2AI0. Even Commander Maddox, the architect of this spectacle, had lost his smirk. It had been replaced by a tight, uncertain line, his eyes wide behind his sunglasses, a flicker of doubt beginning to gnaw at the edges of his colossal ego. For him, this had gone terribly wrong. For everyone else, it had become something primal and fascinating. The narrative of the world narrowed to the woman and the rifle. The narrator's voice would describe her process not as a series of actions, but as a ritual of communion. Her breathing deepened, slowing into the precise, controlled cadence of the marksman's art. Inhale a long, cleansing breath. Exhale, releasing the tension, the noise, the world itself. And then the pause. The sacred space between breaths, the moment of perfect stillness where the body becomes a statue of living stone, a stable platform for the active pure will to follow. In that pause, her universe consisted of only three things: the delicate crosshairs of the reticle, the shimmering mirage that veiled the distant target, and an invisible river of wind flowing between them. She was no longer just a nurse or a soldier. She was a physicist, a meteorologist, an artist. She was painting a 4-second masterpiece in her mind, a detailed portrait of a tiny piece of metal's journey through a hostile world. She saw the bullet's arc, a graceful parabola stretching across the desert. She felt the subtle kiss of the Earth's rotation. She mapped the currents of the wind, seeing them not as a single force, but as a complex tapestry of eddies and streams that would try to nudge her bullet from its destiny. Then, her finger found the trigger. It didn't pull. It didn't jerk. It began a slow, deliberate, almost sensuous press. The narration would focus on that single point of contact, the pad of her index finger on the cold, curved steel. It was the culmination of a lifetime of discipline, the final, quiet command in a long chain of perfect preparation. The rifle's report was a sharp, violent crack that tore through the silence, but it was instantly obsolete. The real event was what followed. The sudden, deafening quiet, punctuated only by the faint, fading echo and the almost subliminal whine of the bullet, a 250-grain projectile traveling at nearly 3 times the speed of sound, now utterly alone on its long journey. For seconds, an eternity, the collective breath of 50 people remained held. The camera of the story would pan across their faces. The young lieutenant, looking pale and terrified, realizing he may have instigated either a miracle or a catastrophe. The seasoned snipers, their faces etched with a mixture of disbelief and dawning, impossible respect. Commander Maddox, his jaw slack, his bravado completely stripped away, leaving only a hollow shell of a man. And General Thorne, his expression unreadable, but his eyes narrowed in absolute, unwavering confirmation. He wasn't waiting for the result. He was simply watching the inevitable unfold. And then it came. Not a loud clang, but a tiny, distant ping. A sound so faint it should have been swallowed by the vastness of the desert. Yet in the cathedral-like silence of the range, It rang out with the clarity of a bell. On the monitor displaying the target feed, the image flickered, and then it resolved. A new black hole had appeared on the steel silhouette. Not on the edge, not on the shoulder. It was a perfect dead-center punch, a punctuation mark at the end of a statement that needed no further words. A collective, involuntary gasp swept through the crowd. No one cheered. No one spoke. They were too stunned, too awestruck. They had not just witnessed an act of incredible skill. They had witnessed something that felt like a tear in the fabric of reality. Maddox, his face ashen, could only whisper the thought that was screaming in everyone's mind. No, that's not possible. The profound, ringing silence was finally broken by the deliberate, rhythmic crunch of boots on gravel. General Thorne, who had remained an observer on the periphery, now moved to the center of the stage. He walked with a purpose that commanded attention, his path taking him directly past Commander Maddox, whom he ignored as if he were a piece of range equipment. He didn't stop until he was standing beside the firing point. Captain Rostova was already disengaged from the weapon system. Her movements were fluid and economical, her focus entirely on the task of clearing the rifle's chamber and rendering it safe. It was the ingrained muscle memory of a professional finishing a job. She did not look up at the general. Her work was not yet complete. Thorne turned his head slightly, his gaze falling upon the grizzled range master. "Sergeant Major," he said, his voice low but carrying the unmistakable weight of command. "Pull up the complete, unredacted service record for Captain Eva Rostova." Authorization Thorne, Omega-7 Alpha. The last part of the phrase was not a standard military code. It was a key, a classified designator that unlocked the deepest, darkest vaults of the personnel database. The sergeant major, a man who had seen everything, felt a jolt. His eyes widened in comprehension, and he moved to his ruggedized tablet with an urgency that bordered on alarm. The screen flickered as he entered the override codes. After a moment, a file appeared, its header glowing with a crimson border reserved for the most sensitive classifications. Thorne took the tablet, but he didn't need to look at it. He knew the contents by heart. He turned to face the stunned, silent audience, his expression grim. "You all just saw something," he began, his voice a cold, sharp instrument. "You saw a demonstration of skill. But what you failed to see was the context. You looked at a soldier, and you saw only a patch. You saw a nurse." He paused, letting the weight of their collective error settle upon them. "I see something else," he began to speak, his words falling like staccato hammer blows, each one dismantling the reality they thought they knew. "Graduate, top of her class, Special Operations Combat Medic course. That much is in her public file. But that's where the public file ends and the truth begins." He recited her hidden history from memory. Valedictorian, United States Army Sniper School. Top graduate, SODIC Level 1, the Special Operations Target Interdiction course. She didn't just pass. She set 3 course records that still stand today. A murmur went through the crowd of snipers. They knew what SODIC was. It was Valhalla. But that was just her entrance exam, Thorne continued, his voice dropping even lower, drawing them in. Her real work began with a program so secret, most of the Joint Chiefs are only vaguely aware of its existence. A program called Nightingale. He let the name hang in the air. Project Nightingale was born from a simple, brutal question. Who is the last person anyone would ever suspect of being the most dangerous individual on the battlefield? The answer was the medic, the healer, the one person whose job is explicitly to save lives. The program took the best medics, the ones with the right psychological profile, and turned them into the most elite Overwatch assets in the world. The ultimate quiet professionals. Ghosts who could walk through a firefight, tend to the wounded, and, if necessary, eliminate a threat from 2 kilometers away without anyone ever knowing they had done more than apply a bandage. He stopped, his eyes scanning the crowd. Her confirmed engagements are classified. Her combat effective range is classified. Her mission history is a black hole of redactions. Her longest successful shot, Thorne paused, turning his head to look at the distant, sun-beaten hillside where the target stood. Just got a little bit longer. The revelation fell upon the audience not as a piece of information, but as a physical weight, crushing their preconceived notions and leaving them gasping in the vacuum of a new, terrifying understanding. General Thorne's gaze, now as hard and cold as chipped granite, shifted from the stunned crowd and settled directly onto Commander Maddox. The instructional, revelatory tone vanished, replaced by the icy precision of a surgeon's scalpel. It was time to excise the cancer. "Commander," Thorne said, and the single word was an indictment. Maddox flinched as if struck. "There is a word for what you did here today. It's not leadership. It's not motivation. It's poison. You allowed your assumptions to become your reality. Assumptions are the enemy of readiness. Prejudice is a cancer in the chain of command, and you let it metastasize in public." He took a slow, deliberate step toward Maddox, who seemed to shrink inside his own uniform. "You looked at a uniform, and you saw a role. You looked at a gender, and you saw a limitation. You looked at a healer, and you saw weakness. You build a pathetic, fragile fantasy of incompetence in your own head to make yourself feel bigger, to shore up an ego that is apparently as brittle as glass." Thorne was now standing directly in front of him, his voice a low, dangerous growl that was for Maddox alone, yet every person on the range felt its chilling vibration. "You saw a nurse. You should have seen a guardian. You mocked her presence on this range. You should have been on your knees, grateful for it. The men and women in her program, the nightingales, they're the ghosts who hunt the wolves that prey on the flock. They spend their entire careers in the shadows, expecting no credit, seeking no glory. Their only reward the quiet knowledge of a life saved, of a mission succeeded. They ask for nothing from people like you, but they have earned, and they will receive one thing. With that, Thorne turned his back on the broken commander. He walked the few feet to where Captain Rostova now stood, her task complete, her hands resting calmly at her sides. She was no longer the object of ridicule. She was the quiet center of the universe. General Thorne, a 3-star general, a man who commanded fleets of aircraft and divisions of men, a warrior who had advised presidents, stopped directly in front of her. Slowly, deliberately, with a reverence that stunned the onlookers into an even deeper silence, he raised his right hand to the brim of his patrol cap. He executed a perfect, textbook salute, his arm locked, his gaze steady. It was not the perfunctory gesture a general gives a subordinate. It was the salute of a soldier to a legend. "Captain Rostova," he said, his voice now filled with a profound and unmistakable respect. "Ma'am, it is an honor to see you work again for the first time." Eva Rostova met his gaze directly. A flicker of mutual understanding passed between them, a shared history in a world of shadows. She brought her own hand up, her salute just as crisp, just as perfect. "General," she replied, her voice calm and even. "Thank you, sir." 2 short sentences. An entire conversation, an entire philosophy contained in 4 simple words. The sight of the saluting general was a tectonic event. It shattered the base's rigid hierarchy and replaced it with a new one based not on rank, but on demonstrated, undeniable competence. One by one, then in a wave, the other officers and soldiers followed their general's lead. A forest of arms rose in salute, a silent, powerful apology, and a testament to a lesson learned in the most dramatic fashion possible. A wave of profound respect washed over the firing range, cleansing the air of the morning's toxic arrogance. And Commander Maddox, forgotten and alone, simply stood there, a ghost at his own execution. The story of that single shot did not spread, it detonated. It moved through the forward operating base with the speed and intensity of a shockwave. By the time the evening meal was served in the main dining facility, every soldier, from the lowest private to the most senior officer, knew. They called it the Nightingale shot. The tale was told and retold, each telling burnishing the legend, adding a new layer of myth. Some said she hadn't used the scope at all, that she'd done it with iron sights. Others swore she had calculated the wind by tasting the dust. A wild rumor even circulated that she had whispered the bullet's name before firing it. The embellishments were fantastical, but the core truth was immutable and more powerful than any fiction. The quiet nurse, with a single act of impossible competence, had silenced the loudest, most arrogant man on the base. The narrative followed the story's path, a ripple spreading through the complex social ecosystem of the military. In enlisted barracks, it was a tale of righteous comeuppance, of victory for the overlooked and underestimated everywhere. In the hushed, wood-paneled confines of the officers' club, it was discussed in low, reverent tones, a cautionary tale about the dangers of hubris. And in the encrypted, silent world of digital message boards and secure chat rooms, the official after-action report was read by other ghosts, other quiet professionals in far-flung, dangerous corners of the world. A legendary operator in a different Tier 1 unit, reading the report on his ruggedized laptop in a safe house thousands of miles away, allowed himself a rare, grim smile and typed a simple reply to a colleague. About time a nightingale got to sing. The most profound change, however, was in Commander Maddox. The event didn't just shame him, it broke him, and in breaking him, it remade him. He was seen a week later, not holding court, not boasting, but observing. He was quieter, his movements less bombastic. He was seen approaching a young female soldier, a mechanic who was struggling to pass her basic rifle qualification. The old Maddox would have mocked her. The new Maddox knelt beside her, his voice low and constructive, offering quiet advice on her grip and breathing, devoid of any condescension. He had learned the lesson in the most brutal, public way imaginable, and it had seared itself into his soul. He even penned a formal, multi-page letter of apology and had it delivered to Captain Rostova's clinic. She accepted it with a simple, forgiving nod, and the matter was never spoken of again. The physical evidence of the day became a sacred relic. The steel target was carefully retrieved from the hillside. The perfect central puncture, a tiny circle of dark, violated steel, was a thing of stark, violent beauty. The base commander, a man who understood the power of symbols, had it mounted on a large mahogany plaque and hung in the main tactical operations center. Beneath it, a simple, elegant brass plate was affixed, its engraving a testament to the new base ethos. 3200M. Chipiti e Rostova. Quiet professionalism. And out on the windswept range, the dusty patch of ground from which she had fired was forever changed. The soldiers no longer called it Firing Point 7. They called it Nightingale's Perch. The aftermath of the event created a halo of myth around Captain Rostova. But she herself remained utterly unchanged, a fixed point in a swirling universe of newfound adoration. She deflected all praise with a quiet, almost dismissive grace. When a young, starstruck infantryman approached her in the chow line, stammering about the impossible shot, she simply nodded, her expression unreadable, and changed the subject. "How's your platoon supply of chest seals, specialist? I heard you were running low. Let's talk after you eat." That's what matters. She consistently, and without effort, redirected the focus from her legend to her duty. Her true impact was felt not in the stories being told about her, but in the lessons she taught in the quiet, sterile confines of the aid station. A few days after the incident, she was leading a training session for a group of new combat medics. Her subject was advanced trauma care, but her lesson was about something far deeper. She held up a tourniquet. "This is a tool," she said, her voice calm and measured. "The rifle is a tool. The scalpel is a tool. But the most important instrument you will ever have is your ability to be silent and observe." She looked at each of them in turn, her gaze intense. "Before you treat the patient, you read the room. You read the battlefield. Before you touch the wound, you must understand the mechanism of injury. How did this happen? Where is the threat? What happens next? To know these things, you must silence your own mind. You must silence your fear, your assumptions, your ego. You must watch. You must listen. The answers are always there, waiting in the quiet, if you are disciplined enough to receive them in that moment." The medics understood. She wasn't just teaching the medicine. She was teaching them her philosophy, the core principle of the quiet professional, and showing them how to apply it to their own sacred craft of saving lives. Her single act on the range had sent a powerful ripple through the entire culture of the base. Officers became more mindful of their words, more hesitant to make snap judgments. Senior NCOs began to actively look for hidden, unconventional talents within their ranks, realizing that a soldier's assigned MOS was merely a label, not the sum of their capabilities. An unwritten rule began to permeate the command structure, known colloquially as the Rostova rule. Never judge a book by its cover, especially not when the book might be capable of hitting a target 2 miles away. The rifle itself, the specific M210 she had used, achieved its own legendary status. The old sergeant major took it out of general rotation. He stored it in a special case, cleaning it with a reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. When new snipers came to the base to train, he would bring it out, not for them to shoot, but for them to see. He would tell them a story of a nurse who picked it up cold, who didn't trust the computer, who trusted herself, and who delivered a lesson in humility that echoed across the entire theater of war. The rifle was no longer just a weapon. It was a symbol, a physical reminder that the power resides not in the tool, but in the steady, practiced, and silent hands of the warrior who wields it. The legend was being built, not by Eva, but around her, forged by the very people she had inspired. A year passed. The relentless churn of deployments and rotations had transformed the face of the forward operating base. New soldiers walked the gravel paths where the legends of the previous rotation were born. Commander Maddox, a quieter and more thoughtful man, had been transferred to a staff position at the Pentagon, his career saved but his trajectory forever altered. General Thorne had retired, his final act of service the quiet preservation of a necessary myth. And Captain Eva Rostova was gone. Her name remained on the base roster, but her assignment was a string of blacked-out redactions. She had rotated out, not home, but to another shadow, another quiet corner of the world where a ghost was needed. She had simply vanished, leaving behind nothing but a story. But the story remained. It had woven itself into the very fabric of the base's identity. It was no longer gossip. It was folklore, a foundational text. We see a new group of soldiers, their faces young and flushed with the bravado of their first deployment, standing in the Tactical Operations Center. They are gathered before the mahogany plaque, their eyes wide as they stare at the impossible hole in the slab of steel. A seasoned first sergeant, a man who wasn't even on the base when it happened, is speaking to them, his voice low and resonant. He tells the story as if he had been there, for in a way he had. He was an inheritor of its truth. "Look at this," the first sergeant says, his finger tapping the brass plate. "Don't look at the hole. Look at the name. Rostova. Captain. Nurse. This isn't a story about shooting. Any trigger puller with $1 million rifle and a lucky gust of wind can get close. This is a story about respect." He leans in, his voice dropping to a near whisper. The soldier who made the shot was mocked by a commander in front of everyone because she didn't fit his idea of a warrior. She was a healer. She was a woman. She was quiet. He thought she was weak. She didn't argue. She didn't complain. She didn't say a word. She let her competence be her voice. She let her discipline be her shield. She let her actions speak for her. That, he says, straightening up, his voice now ringing with authority, is the standard on this base. I don't care what's on your sleeve or on your birth certificate. I care what you can do. Your competence will be your only credential here. The story had transcended its origins. It was now a part of the institution's DNA, an official parable used to combat the insidious creep of prejudice, to instill a culture of humility, and to reinforce the sacred ideal of the quiet professional. It was more than a thrilling anecdote about a remarkable shot. It had become a moral compass for a new generation of warriors. The narrator reflects on this transformation. A true legacy, he muses, isn't a name carved on a plaque or a story told over drinks. It is a standard that is upheld long after you are gone. It is a lesson that is learned so deeply it becomes instinct. Captain Eva Rostova left behind more than the memory of a single, perfectly placed bullet. She left behind a new way of seeing. She reinforced an ancient, fundamental truth, that the loudest voice in the room is almost always the most insecure, and that true strength, true authority, and true honor are found in the calm, quiet, and undeniable demonstration of mastery. Her silence on that day had become the loudest, most enduring lesson of all. The universe of human interaction is defined by two distinct kinds of silence. There is the silence of fear, the suffocating quiet of a crowd complicit in an act of cruelty, the silence of a person who has no answer. That was the silence that filled the air on that firing range before the shot. It was a weak, hollow, and corrosive thing. But then there is another silence. It is the silence of absolute confidence, of a mind so focused on a task that the noise of the world fades to nothing. It is the silence of a master, whose every movement is governed by thousands of hours of unseen practice, of lonely repetition, of failure and correction far from the judging eyes of any audience. This is the silence of an internal core of competence so dense and so powerful that it requires no external validation. This was the silence of Eva Rostova. She did not need to speak because her skill was its own language. She did not need to defend herself because her discipline was an impenetrable shield. And in the aftermath of her action, a third kind of silence was born. The silence of pure, unadulterated awe, the sound of 50 minds simultaneously rewriting their understanding of the possible. Respect, the story teaches us, is not a function of the rank on a collar or the title on a door. It is not something to be demanded in moments of peace and tranquility. It is something that is forged in the crucible of pressure, revealed in the moments when words fail and only action remains. Commander Maddox demanded respect through volume and position. His was a brittle authority that shattered upon contact with genuine excellence. Captain Rostova earned respect through her quiet mastery. Hers was an authority that was elemental, undeniable, and enduring. Her example serves as a universal truth that extends far beyond the confines of a military base. In every office, every laboratory, every workshop, every corner of human endeavor, there are the loud and the quiet. There are the braggarts who build their nests from the praise of others, and there are the masters who build their foundations from the solid bedrock of their own skill. The story of the Nightingale is a timeless reminder to seek out the quiet ones, for they are so often the ones holding the world together. Their silent, tireless competence, the invisible force that prevents chaos from winning the day. The symbolism is perfect. A nightingale, a bird celebrated for the beauty of its song, reimagined as a silent guardian whose only song is a single, perfectly pitched note of justice, a round sent across an impossible distance to restore balance and to remind us of what truly matters. It is a hymn to the profound power of showing, not telling. For more stories where demonstrated competence triumphs over ignorant arrogance, and where quiet discipline defines a hero's true worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.